The world as they knew it was gone. The outbreak had struck fast, an invisible wave that swept across the globe in mere weeks. What started as rumors of strange sicknesses quickly spiraled into chaos as the infected, once human, became mindless predators, the undead, relentless in their hunt. But there was a glimmer of hope in the midst of the devastation. In a small, dilapidated town, a group of survivors found themselves barricaded inside a local high school. The windows were boarded, doors sealed, and the smell of sweat and fear filled the air. Led by Sarah, a former teacher, they had managed to stay alive by sheer willpower and the limited resources they had scavenged. But it wasn't enough. The morning began like any other, quiet, tense, and filled with an underlying dread. As Sarah looked out from the high school's second-floor window, she could see the streets empty, save for the occasional undead wandering aimlessly. The group had learned to move in silence, avoiding any unnecessary noise that might attract attention. But today, something felt different. A distant rumble echoed through the streets, growing louder by the second. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't the only one who had noticed. Around her, the survivors exchanged uneasy glances. They'd faced threats before, but this felt like something bigger. Sarah quickly gathered her group. There was Alex, a former mechanic with a sharp mind and a knack for fixing anything, from weapons to broken barricades. Then there was Linda, a nurse who had seen her fair share of blood, but never like this. And finally, James, a teenager who had lost his family in the initial outbreak and now clung to the survivors for any sense of safety. "Sarah, what is it?" Alex asked, his voice laced with tension as he joined her by the window. She didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning the streets below. And then she saw it. A massive wave of zombies, more than they had ever encountered, moving with a single-minded purpose toward the high school. They weren't just mindlessly wandering this time, they were organized. "It's a horde," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The weight of the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The zombies were coming. And there was no way they could fight them off with the limited ammunition and supplies they had. The survivors scrambled to the makeshift barricades, preparing for the worst. As the horde closed in, Sarah tried to think fast. They couldn't run. They couldn't hide. They had no choice but to fight. But as she looked at the group, fear set in. She knew they were no match for the sheer numbers of the undead. Her eyes flickered back to the streets below, where the horde continued to grow, surrounding the high school on all sides. "We need a plan," she said, her voice more urgent now. "We're not going down without a fight." Alex nodded, already working on a plan in his head. "If we can create a diversion, we can draw some of them away from the building. Maybe get a few to follow us to the edge of town." Linda frowned. "And then what?" "We're running out of supplies. We don't have much time." The desperation in her voice was clear, but Sarah's mind was racing. She needed to find a way to give them a fighting chance. "Sarah, we can't just sit here." James spoke up, his voice shaking but determined. "We need to fight back. We've been running long enough." Sarah turned to face him, her expression hardening. "We don't have the luxury of time, James. But we will fight. We have to." She turned back to the window, her eyes searching for any sign of weakness in the horde. As the first wave of zombies reached the gates of the high school, their growls filled the air. They were getting closer. "We have to make a stand," she said, her voice steady now. "This is it. We can't let them take everything." As the group prepared for what would surely be the hardest fight of their lives, Sarah realized one thing: they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to reclaim their future. With determination in her heart, she led the charge, ready to face the horde head-on. The battle for the school had begun. The school's hallways echoed with the sound of frantic footsteps as the survivors fortified their position. Sarah's heart raced as she moved swiftly through the building, rallying the group to prepare for the inevitable. There was no turning back now, the horde was at their door, and time was quickly running out. Alex had already begun dismantling the nearest furniture, stacking desks and chairs to create a makeshift barricade at the main entrance. Linda, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, helped reinforce the windows with more wood and nails. James stood by the door, his hands trembling as he clutched a baseball bat. "Are you sure we can hold them off?" Linda asked, her voice tinged with worry as she glanced at Sarah. "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied, her voice steady but her mind racing. "We have to fight." Outside, the sound of the horde grew louder, a maddening chorus of growls and moans. It was only a matter of time before the undead would start pushing against the barricades, testing their strength. Sarah knew they couldn't afford to wait until that moment. They needed to be proactive. "Alex, do you think you can rig up some kind of distraction?" she asked, hoping his mechanical skills could offer them an edge. "I've been thinking about it," Alex said, his face scrunched in concentration. "If we can get to the gymnasium's PA system, I can blast some noise to draw the zombies away from the entrance. Maybe even scatter them long enough to buy us time." "Good," Sarah nodded. "Linda, you stay here and keep an eye on James. Make sure he's ready for anything." "Understood," Linda replied, though her eyes showed the fear she was trying to hide. Sarah turned back to Alex. "Let's move quickly." The two of them slipped down the hallway, their footsteps muted by the thick walls and the eerie silence that followed them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed the fear away. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The fate of the group rested on their actions now. When they reached the gym, Alex immediately got to work, prying open the PA system panel with his tools. Sarah scanned the gymnasium nervously, her mind on the horde outside. She could feel the weight of every second ticking by. The closer the zombies came, the less time they had to act. "Almost there," Alex muttered, his face flushed with concentration as he worked. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the main entrance. The barricade had been breached. Sarah's heart dropped. "We need to hurry," she snapped, her voice sharp with urgency. Alex gave a quick nod and hit a button on the PA system, flooding the gym with a blaring noise, loud, jarring, and completely out of place in the stillness of the school. The sound was a calculated chaos, designed to pull the zombies toward the noise and away from the building. The reaction was immediate. The growls from the horde grew louder, but they weren't directly outside anymore. Sarah felt a small sense of relief as she heard the zombies shuffling away from the entrance. It was working. But it wouldn't last long. "Let's move!" Sarah shouted as Alex finished up. They both turned to leave the gym, knowing they had to get back to the others before the distraction wore off. As they sprinted back toward the high school's entrance, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her chest. Even if the zombies were momentarily distracted, the horde was too massive, and their supplies were far too limited. This was only buying them time, not safety. They reached the barricade just as Linda and James heard their footsteps. Linda's eyes widened when she saw them. "It worked?" she asked, hope flickering in her voice. "For now," Sarah replied, catching her breath. "But it's not over. They'll regroup. We have to plan our next move, and soon." Suddenly, the ground beneath them rumbled, a tremor that sent dust falling from the ceilings. It wasn't just the zombies. Something bigger was coming. James looked at Sarah, his expression confused. "What was that?" "I don't know," Sarah said, her gaze darting to the entrance. "But whatever it is, it's not good." A new fear gripped Sarah's heart. They weren't just facing an invasion anymore. They were facing something much worse. And whatever it was coming for them. The tremor shook the entire building, causing dust to fall from the cracked ceiling. The survivors froze for a split second, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Outside, the groans of the undead grew louder again, but it wasn't the zombies that had caused the rumble. It felt like something more, something bigger, was closing in. "What the hell was that?" Alex asked, his voice tight with unease as he gripped the improvised weapon in his hand. Sarah didn't answer right away. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. The ground shook again, this time more violently, as if something heavy was moving across the earth, something large, moving with purpose. The survivors instinctively backed away from the walls, the fear palpable in the air. Is it them? James asked, his eyes wide with dread. More zombies? I don't think so, Sarah replied, her gaze locked on the door as she strained to hear any sign of what was outside. She had a sinking feeling in her stomach. The rumble wasn't just from the undead, it felt like a force of nature. They had already faced the relentless waves of zombies. Now, it seemed, something else was out there, lurking in the distance, just beyond their sight. Alex stepped forward, his brow furrowed. We need to find out what's causing this. It could be another group of survivors, or something worse. Another group? Linda scoffed, her voice tinged with bitterness. Survivors wouldn't make the ground shake like that. And we've seen enough to know there's nothing human left out there. Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah knew Linda was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't something they could prepare for. But they had no choice but to face it. We'll need to check the perimeter, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Alex, James, you come with me. Linda, you stay here. Keep the barricades secure. Linda nodded, but her face showed more concern than trust. The ground shook again, louder this time, as if whatever was out there had grown closer. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Every instinct told her that this was a threat unlike any they had faced before. The group made their way to the main hallway. Every step felt heavier, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. As Sarah moved toward the exit, she could hear the soft shuffle of the undead outside, their guttural groans rising and falling like an ominous tide. Let's move quickly, Sarah whispered, her eyes flickering between Alex and James, who followed closely behind. They pushed open the door just enough to peek outside, but the sight that greeted them was far worse than they had imagined. The horde was still there, milling about the streets, but it wasn't the zombies that caught their attention. Off in the distance, beyond the outskirts of the town, was a towering figure, large, hulking, and unmistakably inhuman. It looked like a grotesque, twisted version of a human, its body covered in patches of decaying flesh and sinew. What the hell is that? Alex breathed, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Sarah squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. It was moving slowly but with an unsettling purpose. The massive creature didn't seem to care about the zombies, it was pushing through them as if they were nothing more than obstacles. It's not a zombie, James muttered, eyes wide with shock. It's something else. Sarah's gut twisted. Whatever it wasn't like the undead they'd been fighting for weeks. This thing had intelligence, direction. And it was coming their way. We need to get back inside, Sarah said urgently. It's not just the zombies we have to worry about anymore. The three of them quickly retreated into the building, slamming the door shut behind them. The force of the creature's movement shook the ground again, louder now, as if it was drawing closer with each passing second. Inside, Linda had already begun reinforcing the barricades, her movements quick and practiced. She didn't need to ask what had happened, she could see the fear in their eyes. What the hell was that? She asked, her voice trembling. We don't know, Sarah replied, her mind racing. But whatever it is, it's not alone. And it's not just zombies we're up against anymore. We need to be ready for anything. Outside, the sound of the horde had grown louder, but the rumbling of the giant creature was unmistakable. It was like the earth itself was trembling beneath its feet. The zombies were drawn to it, mindlessly moving toward the creature's path as if it held some kind of unspoken power over them. We're running out of time, Alex said, his voice grim. We need to act now, before it's too late. But Sarah knew there was more to this than just the threat of the horde. This creature, whatever it was something they had never seen before. And it was coming for them. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as the survivors huddled inside the high school. The distant rumbling continued, accompanied by the ever-present moans and growls of the zombies, now in greater numbers. The massive creature was nearing, its movements slow yet purposeful. It wasn't just an anomaly in the chaos, it was the thing that would change everything. Sarah paced nervously, her mind racing. What kind of creature was it? And how had it come to exist in a world already ravaged by the undead? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp noise, the scraping of something metal against wood. Alex, his face grim, was already examining the barricades. "We need more reinforcement," he said, tapping his fingers against a weak spot in the wood. "This won't hold if that thing decides to break in." Linda nodded, worry etched across her face. "But if it's as strong as you think, reinforcing the door won't matter. What if it just tears through everything?" "We can't just sit here and wait," Sarah said, her voice sharp. She turned to James, who stood by the window, peering through the small gap in the boards. His eyes were wide, his lips trembling with fear. I can see it," James said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's coming closer." "James, get away from the window," Sarah commanded, stepping toward him. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not," James's voice cut off abruptly, and his wide eyes stared into the distance. It's looking right at us." Sarah's heart stopped. She quickly moved to his side, her own gaze following his. Sure enough, the creature had turned in their direction, its grotesque form now clearly visible from the edge of the school's front yard. It was a towering mass of rotting flesh and bone, with arms far too long for a human, dragging the ground as it moved. Its face, if it could even be called a face, was a mess of twisted skin and empty, hollow eyes. The zombies, mindless and wandering, were following it. It was like the creature exuded an unnatural influence over them, drawing them in like a moth to a flame. "We can't stay here," Alex said, his voice laced with panic. "That thing. It won't stop. It'll lead them right to us." "No," Sarah said firmly, shaking her head. "We're not running. We fight." Alex stared at her in disbelief. "Fight? We don't have the weapons, the ammo, or the manpower to take down something like that." "We'll improvise," Sarah replied, her eyes narrowing as she looked out the window once more. "We have to. If we run now, we won't survive. But if we can stop that thing, we might have a chance." Linda walked over to the window as well, her face pale but determined. "I hate to admit it, but Sarah's right. We can't run forever. If we're going to do this, we need a plan." They stood in silence for a moment, each person wrestling with the fear that gripped their hearts. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice steady with a resolve that surprised even her. "We know the creature is drawing the zombies toward us," she said. "We use that. We get them all in one place, create a bottleneck, and make our stand." "Alex, you said you could make something to distract them? Do it now." Alex, though clearly frightened, nodded. "I've got an idea. We can rig up a car alarm. It'll make enough noise to draw them in, but we'll need to act fast." "Perfect," Sarah said. "We set the trap, draw them in, and when they're close enough, we make our move." "But what about that thing?" James asked, his voice shaking. "How do we stop it?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But we don't have a choice. We have to try." The survivors quickly set to work, their desperation pushing them to move faster than they ever had before. The sound of the beast's footsteps echoed louder with each passing minute, and the pressure was mounting. They knew they didn't have much time before it arrived at the school. Alex dashed to the nearest vehicle in the parking lot, a rusted old sedan that hadn't been moved in weeks. He opened the hood, and with quick, skilled movements, he began to wire the car's alarm system to a nearby tree, setting up a rudimentary tripwire. The car would serve as the bait, loud, attention-grabbing, and hopefully, just enough to draw the zombies in. Sarah, meanwhile, gathered whatever weapons they had, a few baseball bats, a crowbar, and an old hunting rifle. They weren't ideal, but they would have to do. She felt the weight of the rifle in her hands and tried to steady her shaking hands. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was their last chance. Linda, calm despite the chaos, checked the barricades one last time, making sure they were secure enough to hold for as long as possible. "It's done," Alex called, his voice tense. "All we need is for them to take the bait." The distant rumbling intensified as the massive creature drew closer, its presence like a looming shadow over their small, makeshift stronghold. Every second felt like an eternity. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced. The others nodded, their eyes locked on her. This was their chance, their only chance. As Sarah signaled Alex to set the trap into motion, a deep, resonant growl echoed from the creature, louder than ever before. The battle for survival had begun in earnest. The car alarm blared, its shrill, jarring noise cutting through the otherwise quiet night like a knife. The survivors held their breath, watching from their window as the zombies, drawn to the sound, began to shuffle toward the vehicle in the parking lot. Their movements were slow, mindless, but there were so many of them, flooding into the area like a tide. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the first few stumble toward the sedan, following the loud beeping like moths to a flame. "It's working," Alex muttered, his voice tense with anticipation. "We just need them all in one spot." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. The massive creature, still far off but drawing closer with each rumble of the earth, had seemingly taken no notice of the car or the gathering horde. Instead, it continued its slow, steady march, the weight of its presence growing heavier by the second. "We need to move now," Sarah said, her voice sharp and commanding. "Alex, James, we'll head out and flank them. Linda, stay here and keep an eye on the barricades. If that thing gets too close, you'll need to hold the door." Linda nodded, her jaw clenched tight with determination. "I'll keep it shut. You make sure you all come back." With one last look at the growing horde in the parking lot, Sarah motioned for Alex and James to follow her as they silently moved out the back door of the school. Their plan was simple: lure the zombies into the trap, get them as close as possible, and then set the real attack into motion. As they moved through the dark, damp hallways, the distant growl of the beast outside sent chills down Sarah's spine. Every few seconds, she heard the footsteps of the zombies growing nearer, their dragging feet creating an eerie soundtrack to the creeping dread that settled in her chest. There were too many of them, and the creature's presence was only adding to the terror. "We're getting close," Sarah whispered, gesturing for the others to keep their heads down. She peered around the corner of the school's back wall, her eyes flicking to the parking lot where the car alarm was still blaring. The zombies had gathered around the vehicle, their groans and moans filling the air as they shuffled in tight clusters. The majority of the horde was fixated on the car, but there were a few stragglers, wandering aimlessly near the edges of the lot. "Now," Sarah whispered. The trio moved swiftly, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath their boots. As they approached the far side of the lot, Sarah's eyes locked onto the mass of undead gathered near the sedan. They were close, dangerously close. "On my mark," she said, turning to Alex and James. "We do this fast, we do it quiet. Once we start, we don't stop." The air seemed to freeze as the seconds stretched, the tension almost unbearable. Then, with a single nod, Sarah gave the signal. "Now!" In an instant, Alex ran forward, pulling the tripwire from the nearby tree, causing the car alarm to blare even louder. The sound was deafening, but it worked. The zombies, fully distracted by the noise, began to move in tighter circles, their instincts driven by hunger, by the relentless need to feed. James, his face set in grim determination, pulled a small homemade smoke bomb from his jacket. With a quick flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the heart of the crowd. The smoke billowed outward, creating a thick, choking haze. "Get ready!" Sarah shouted, raising the rifle she'd been clutching. Her fingers trembled as she aimed at the closest zombies, knowing this was only the beginning. The smoke had worked as planned, disorienting the undead, forcing them to crowd together in confusion. As the creatures stumbled through the smoke, Sarah and Alex moved in from opposite sides, taking advantage of the disarray to pick off the zombies one by one. The crack of the rifle and the thud of makeshift weapons hitting bone filled the air, but their movements were measured, controlled. They couldn't afford to waste energy or time. But it wasn't just the zombies they had to worry about. The massive creature had reached the edge of the school grounds. It loomed larger and more terrifying up close, its grotesque form towering over the horde. It wasn't just walking through the zombies now, it was moving toward the school, its feet crushing anything in its path. Its presence alone seemed to cast a shadow over the survivors' fight. "It's here," James hissed, his voice shaking. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. They had to finish this now. "Fall back," Sarah shouted. "Back to the school." Without hesitation, the group turned and sprinted toward the safety of the building, leaving the dwindling group of zombies to stumble around in the smoke. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the creature neared, its footsteps impossibly loud in the otherwise still night. They reached the doors of the school just as the creature broke through the last line of trees. Its monstrous form filled the doorway, blocking the light from the outside as it loomed over them. The survivors slammed the door shut, but it was clear, the battle had only just begun. Inside, Linda was already preparing for their next move, her face pale but resolute. "How many did you get?" she asked, her voice tense. "Not enough," Sarah replied, panting. "That thing, it's coming. And it's not going to stop." The creature's growl echoed outside, reverberating through the walls, its sound growing more and more insistent. "We have one shot," Sarah said, her eyes meeting each of her teammates. "We fight, or we die." The tension inside the school was suffocating. The barricades that once felt like safety now seemed like fragile barriers, holding back an unstoppable force. The massive creature outside roared, its guttural growl reverberating through the walls, a constant reminder of the nightmare just beyond their reach. The survivors, exhausted but determined, huddled together, preparing for the worst. Sarah stood at the front of the group, her grip tight on the rifle. Her heart was racing, but her mind was sharp. She had always been the one to keep her head in the most dire situations, but this was different. The creature they were facing wasn't just another zombie, it was something far worse, something that had crossed the line between the living and the undead in ways they couldn't comprehend. And the zombies it controlled only made it more dangerous. "We need to be ready," Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. "The creature will come for us next. We have to take out as many zombies as we can, then find a way to bring it down." "Easier said than done," Alex replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "That thing's too big. We don't even know what will stop it." "Agreed," Linda said, tightening her grip on the crowbar she had taken as a weapon. "But we don't have the luxury of sitting around waiting. If it's coming, we fight back." Sarah nodded, her gaze moving to the window. Outside, the creature's enormous silhouette was barely visible in the dark, but they could hear its every move. It was closing in, and the sound of its footsteps shook the building with every step. "We don't have time to waste," Sarah said, her tone hardening. "We need to take out the zombies surrounding the school and make our way to the front. Once we get them under control, we'll need to figure out how to stop that thing." The others nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. There was no more running. No more hiding. They had to make their stand now. The group moved quickly, splitting into pairs. Sarah and Alex took the lead, heading to the front entrance, while James and Linda made their way to the back. The school was eerily quiet now, save for the distant growls and moans of the undead. The trap they had set earlier had worked, drawing a good portion of the zombies toward the parking lot. But that wasn't enough. They had to finish what they'd started. Sarah moved cautiously, her footsteps light and deliberate as she approached the main doors. Alex was close behind, his expression tense but focused. They peeked through the gaps in the barricades, scanning the grounds outside. The zombies were still gathering in the parking lot, drawn to the lingering sound of the car alarm. But the creature wasn't with them anymore. It had gone quiet, and that silence was worse than any noise. "It's here," Sarah whispered, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The massive beast was just outside, its hulking form almost blending into the night. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, locked onto the school. "Stay low," Sarah ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're going to have to move fast." Without another word, she and Alex sprinted toward the main entrance, darting between cars and abandoned vehicles as the shadows of the undead shuffled nearby. They could hear the creature's low growls, but they kept their focus. Their goal was simple: clear the zombies around the entrance, secure the path, and make their way to the front gates. As they reached the front steps, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The creature was closer than she had thought, standing just outside the school's perimeter, its massive form towering above the smaller, slower zombies that still wandered nearby. It didn't make a sound, it just stood there, as if waiting for them to make the first move. "This is it," Alex said, voice tight. "We take it down now." But Sarah hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the creature's movements, trying to read its intentions. There was something about the way it moved, too precise, too deliberate. It was different from the others. This was no mindless zombie. This thing had a purpose. "We need to find its weakness," Sarah muttered. "Something we can use against it." Before Alex could respond, the creature moved, slowly but decisively. It wasn't coming straight for them, instead, it was directing the horde, pulling the zombies toward the school, as though orchestrating the chaos. The survivors couldn't wait any longer. "Let's do this!" Sarah shouted, her voice echoing in the stillness. With a battle cry, they surged forward, charging through the front entrance and into the midst of the zombie horde. The undead barely noticed them at first, too caught up in the frenzy the creature had created. But once the survivors were among them, the battle began in earnest. Sarah swung the rifle like a club, knocking zombies out of her path, while Alex used a crowbar, methodically smashing skulls with each strike. Linda and James fought valiantly from the back, keeping the zombies at bay and clearing the path. But it wasn't enough. The horde was endless, their numbers too great. The creature's low growl echoed from behind them, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was moving closer, and the zombies were closing in on all sides. She had no idea how much time they had left. "We need a plan," James shouted, his voice panicked as he fought off a particularly aggressive zombie. "We don't have one," Sarah snapped back. "Just keep fighting." As they fought their way toward the creature, the air was thick with the stench of decay, and the groans of the undead filled every space. Time seemed to slow as they pushed forward, one zombie at a time. Then, with a deafening roar, the creature finally moved. It stepped forward, its enormous hands reaching out as if to crush them all. It was now or never. The ground shook violently as the creature's massive form loomed closer, its every step like a thunderous crash. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process what was happening. This was their final stand. If they couldn't bring down this abomination, everything they had fought for would be lost. "Move!" Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The survivors pressed forward, pushing their way through the sea of zombies. Their weapons were growing heavy, their stamina running low, but they couldn't afford to stop. The creature towered over them, its grotesque face twisting into a monstrous sneer as it loomed above the horde. It seemed to have no regard for the zombies beneath it, simply shoving them aside like an afterthought. It was all part of the plan, its plan. "We can't just kill it like the others," Alex muttered, his voice strained. "It's not like them. It's smarter." "I know," Sarah replied, gritting her teeth. "We need to get it to lower its guard. Anything that'll make it vulnerable." As the survivors fought their way closer to the creature, Sarah's mind raced. She could see the glimmer of something in the creature's glowing eyes, a sort of intelligence that none of the zombies had ever displayed. It was directing the undead, moving them with purpose. It was controlling the chaos. The horde, while dangerous, was nothing compared to this abomination. It was clear now, this creature wasn't just a mindless force of nature. It was the core of the infection, the one that held the power to control everything else. If they could destroy it, they would have a chance at surviving. "We need to hit it where it hurts," Sarah said, her voice low and resolute. "We need to get it in the head, right between the eyes." Alex nodded, understanding. But as they neared the creature, they realized just how difficult that would be. Its thick, muscular body loomed in front of them, each movement like a shockwave. The undead around them were relentless, closing in, making it nearly impossible to get a clear shot. "We need to get its attention," James suggested, fighting off a zombie that lunged at him. "We'll distract it, you take the shot." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she considered the idea. It was risky, but it was their best chance. We'll do it, Sarah said firmly. On 3. Alex, you and I will create a diversion. Linda, James, get ready. When we have it distracted, take your shot. The others nodded, their faces grim but determined. It was now or never. They waited for the right moment. The creature, still towering over them, had begun to focus all its attention on the survivors. It growled, an eerie rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate the very air. The horde of zombies, now even more aggressive, pressed in from all sides, but the creature seemed to care more about the humans than anything else. That's it, Sarah whispered. On 3. 3, she muttered under her breath, her grip tightening on her rifle. Without warning, Sarah and Alex sprinted toward the creature, making as much noise as possible. They ran past clusters of zombies, darting between the undead and throwing distractions wherever they could. Alex tossed a canister of homemade smoke into the air, obscuring their movements. Sarah fired a shot in the air, hoping to draw the creature's attention fully toward them. The creature's head snapped around, its glowing eyes locking onto Sarah and Alex. It roared in fury, its massive hand reaching out to swipe at them. In that split second, Sarah and Alex dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. Now! Sarah shouted, as she and Alex rolled away from the creature's reach. Linda and James, who had been waiting for the signal, took their positions. Linda had set herself up on the far side of the creature, while James was crouched behind a fallen wall, aiming his rifle. The distraction had worked. The creature's focus was now entirely on the 2 survivors, its attention fixed on the moving targets. Now! James called, his voice steady despite the chaos. Linda fired first, her shot ringing out, hitting the creature square in the chest. But it didn't stop. The creature barely flinched, as though the bullet had done little more than annoy it. Again! Sarah yelled. Aim for the head. James took a deep breath, adjusting his aim. With a determined look in his eyes, he fired again. This time, the shot landed, striking the creature right between its glowing eyes. It staggered back, a high-pitched screech of pain echoing through the air. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The creature's massive form swayed, its control over the zombies faltering. For the first time, it seemed unsure. The horde, once directed by the creature's will, became disoriented, some of them wandering aimlessly while others continued to move toward the survivors. But Sarah didn't hesitate. This was their moment. Now, she shouted, rallying her team. Finish it! With renewed determination, Sarah and Alex ran forward, dodging zombies as they went. The creature, now weakened and disoriented, struggled to regain its balance, but it was too late. The survivors pressed forward, using their weapons and their strength to push through the remaining zombies, inching closer to the creature. In a final, desperate attempt, Sarah swung her rifle at the creature's head, striking it with all her might. The creature let out a monstrous screech, its body jerking as it began to collapse. With one final roar, the creature fell to the ground, its massive form crashing into the earth, sending tremors through the ground. The remaining zombies, once controlled by its will, stopped moving entirely, as though the source of their hunger had been severed. Sarah stood panting, her body shaking with adrenaline. They had done it. Against all odds, they had brought down the monster. But they weren't out of danger yet. The aftermath of the battle was a surreal silence. The creature's colossal form lay motionless on the ground, a once menacing presence now reduced to a lifeless heap of flesh. The zombies that had once moved with single-minded intent, following the creature's every command, were now disoriented, confused, and slowly but surely falling into disarray. It was as though the very heartbeat of the apocalypse had been severed. Sarah stood among the wreckage, her eyes scanning the area. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the ground beneath her was slick with the remnants of the fight. But despite the carnage around her, there was a sense of peace, a fragile, hard-won peace. We did it, Alex's voice was almost a whisper, as though he couldn't believe it himself. He was standing beside her, his rifle lowered and his body slumped from exhaustion. Sarah nodded slowly, but there was no triumph in her expression, only a quiet determination. "We did. But it's not over. Not yet." She could still hear the faint growl of a few lingering zombies, their instincts scrambling without the creature's command. There were more out there, scattered in the surrounding areas, but they weren't a cohesive force anymore. The creature had been their leader, their driving force, and now that it was gone, the remaining undead were nothing more than mindless husks. "Should we finish them off?" James asked, his voice breaking through the stillness. He and Linda were close behind, both of them visibly drained, but alive. Sarah turned to face him. "We will," she said. "But we need to regroup first. Make sure the school is secure, check for supplies, and..." A loud crash interrupted her, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scream. It was coming from the back of the building. Without thinking, Sarah and Alex sprinted toward the source of the noise. They found Linda and James already moving, weapons raised, as they approached the back exit. "Stay close," Sarah ordered, her voice firm. "Let's see what we're dealing with." They cautiously rounded the corner, guns at the ready, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The scream had been short, frantic, but it wasn't coming from a human. It was a sound that made Sarah's blood run cold. A lone figure staggered out from the shadows, a zombie, but not just any zombie. It was different. Larger. More aggressive. Its skin was twisted, malformed, and its eyes were wild, glowing with an unnatural intensity. "It's still not over," Linda said quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "There's more." The survivors stood their ground, their weapons raised. Sarah's mind raced as she took in the new threat. This zombie was unlike anything they had faced before. It was stronger, faster, and seemed to have retained a semblance of cunning, like the creature they had just killed. "This isn't just a random straggler," Sarah said, her voice cold. "It's another one. It's like the creature, but smaller. A new breed." Alex cursed under his breath. "So, we're not out of the woods?" "No," Sarah replied, taking a step forward. "But we're not giving up. Not after everything we've been through." The creature snarled, its teeth bared as it lunged forward. The survivors fired in unison, their shots finding their mark, but the zombie didn't go down easily. It staggered but kept coming, its strength unnerving. With a growl, it barreled toward them, forcing the group to scatter. Sarah rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's grasp, and fired again, this time hitting it in the shoulder. It stumbled back but remained standing. "It's not enough," James shouted. "We need to take it down, now." Sarah shouted back. Without thinking, Sarah sprinted toward the zombie, dodging its attacks. As it swung its massive arm toward her, she dove under it, coming up behind the creature. In one swift motion, she plunged a knife into its back, twisting it with all her might. The zombie shrieked, its movements growing erratic, but it didn't fall. Sarah was running out of time. The others were moving in, keeping the creature distracted, but she knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Then, in an instant of clarity, she saw the weak point, the back of its neck. She had to take it out in one shot, or they were all done for. "Now!" Sarah shouted, her voice commanding. "Aim for the neck." James and Alex didn't hesitate. Together, they fired at once, their shots hitting the creature's neck with precision. The zombie howled, its body convulsing violently before it collapsed to the ground, lifeless. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with the weight of what they had just endured. Sarah felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. The school was safe, for now. But Sarah knew the truth, the world they once knew was gone. The creature they had just destroyed was just a glimpse of the horrors still waiting beyond. There were more threats lurking in the shadows. But the survivors had learned something important over the course of this battle. They were resilient. They had survived the worst and had fought against the odds. And as long as they had breath in their bodies, they would continue to fight. "This isn't the end," Sarah said, her voice quiet but resolute. We rebuild. We resist. We fight for tomorrow. Alex nodded. We rise. Together. And so, in the midst of a world forever changed, the survivors began to rebuild. Not just for themselves, but for the future. The zombies may have been a scourge upon the earth, but humanity's spirit was far from broken. They would rise again, stronger and united, ready to face whatever came next. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, they knew one thing for sure: the resistance had just begun. End of Part 8, end of story.